At 4:59 p.m., my boss took the credit for my $30 million project in front of the entire executive team. By 9:12 a.m. the next morning, that same project was collapsing, and everyone suddenly needed to know why I had stopped talking. He thought putting his name on my work would make him look brilliant. He didn't realize he had also put his name on every shortcut, every missing approval, and one problem I had warned him about 3 times. By the end, he was begging for the person he had pushed aside. Every story here is about someone who got underestimated and made them regret it. For 6 years, I worked in operations strategy for a national logistics company called Meridian Freight Group. We moved medical supplies, industrial equipment, and temperature-controlled shipments across 14 states. Not glamorous. But when a hospital is waiting on a shipment of surgical equipment, glamorous is not the point. Reliable is the point. I was a senior project manager, which meant I was usually the person people called when a small issue had become a 6-figure problem and someone important needed a clean answer before lunch. I was good at building systems, not presentations. Systems. The kind that still work when people are tired, rushed, under pressure, and looking for someone else to blame. My project was called Horizon. It was a new routing platform designed to reduce missed delivery windows, eliminate duplicate dispatch work, and help Meridian compete for a $30 million regional healthcare contract. I had spent 11 months on it. 11 months of vendor calls at 7 a.m. Pilot site visits. Budget meetings. Risk assessments. Training plans. 3 versions of the implementation timeline because our field teams kept finding problems headquarters had never considered. I knew the project well because I had built it from nothing. My boss, Grant Holloway, knew it well because he liked saying the word horizon in executive meetings. Grant had been hired 9 months earlier as Vice President of Transformation. That title sounded impressive. It mostly meant he walked into rooms after other people had done the hard part and explained why the results proved his leadership. He had one habit everyone noticed. Whenever he liked an idea, he would lean back in his chair, fold his hands over his stomach, and say, "That's exactly where I was going," even when he had clearly not been going there. He did it with strategy. He did it with budgets. He did it with other people's sentences. And eventually, he did it with my project. The first time he crossed the line was subtle. He removed my name from the Horizon Steering Committee deck. The second time was louder. He presented my pilot results to the COO without inviting me. Then came the Friday meeting at 4:59 p.m. The whole executive group was there. The COO, finance, legal, 2 regional presidents, and Grant, standing beside a screen with my numbers, my timeline, my risk chart, and my work. He clicked to the final slide. "Horizon is the framework I developed to modernize our healthcare logistics division," he said. "Not we developed. Not my team developed. I developed." Then he looked straight at me and smiled. Like he expected me to be grateful for being in the room. But Grant had missed one detail. A detail buried in the project plan that he had never bothered to read past page 12. And by Monday morning, that detail was going to cost him everything he thought he had stolen. I didn't correct Grant in that meeting. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't send an angry email or make a scene in front of leadership. I just wrote down the time, saved the final version of the presentation, and went home. Because Grant didn't know that I had already put one condition in writing, Horizon could not launch without my final operational sign-off. And he was about to launch it anyway. Grant called me at 8:06 a.m. Monday. No greeting. No good morning. Just, "Why isn't the launch checklist complete?" I had been at my desk for 6 minutes. "The checklist is complete," I said. "The final approval isn't." He paused. That was Grant's first mistake. He only paused when something interrupted the version of reality he had already chosen. "What approval?" he asked. "The operational readiness approval." "We covered readiness." "We covered the executive timeline," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." I could hear him walking. His office had hardwood floors, and Grant walked fast when he was irritated. Sharp steps. Measured steps. Like every hallway belonged to him. "Send me what you need," he said. I already did. Thursday at 2:18 p.m. I don't remember that. I know. That came out calmer than I expected. I had sent him a 3-page launch exception report. It listed 4 open issues. The biggest was a data mapping failure between the new routing platform and our temperature control monitoring system. In plain English, Horizon could schedule a delivery as on time, even if the trailer temperature record had never transferred into the customer file. For most shipments, that was inconvenient. For medical supplies, it was a serious compliance problem. The report said the same thing in 3 separate places. Do not launch statewide until monitoring data has been validated across all pilot lanes. Grant had replied with one sentence. Let's not let edge cases derail strategic momentum. Edge cases. That was what he called 18% of our healthcare deliveries. He wanted the regional rollout to start Monday because the board meeting was Wednesday, and he wanted to show them a live launch. He didn't care that the pilot had only been completed in 3 facilities. He cared that the word live sounded better than the word pending. I sent him the report again. At 8:19 a.m., he replied. Proceed with launch. We can reconcile any issues in parallel. Not please proceed. Not can we assess. Proceed. I stared at that email for a few seconds. Then I forwarded it to myself. Then I wrote back. Please confirm that you are directing launch despite the unresolved temperature monitoring integration issue described in the attached report. His answer came 7 minutes later. Confirmed. That was the moment the project stopped being my problem alone. At 9 a.m., Horizon went live across 6 regional distribution centers. For the first 40 minutes, it looked fine. Orders moved through the system. Dispatchers logged in. The dashboard turned green. Grant sent a company-wide email with the subject line, "A new era begins." He copied the CEO. He copied the board liaison. He copied me. The email described Horizon as a transformation initiative led by the office of the VP. No mention of my team. No mention of the operations group that had built the pilot. No mention of the risk report sitting in his inbox. At 10:13 a.m., the first warning appeared. A shipment scheduled for St. Clair Medical Center showed as completed in Horizon. But the trailer had never left the distribution yard. One of the dispatch supervisors called me directly. Can you look at this? She asked. The system says the truck is in the city, but I'm standing next to it. I opened the dashboard. The location feed had duplicated the previous successful route. The platform was displaying a shipment status based on old data. Not current data. Old data. That meant the system was not simply missing temperature records. It was fabricating confidence. I called Grant. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. So I documented the issue, paused the affected route category, and sent an incident report to the launch group. Grant replied 23 minutes later. Why are we pausing anything on day 1? Because the system was reporting deliveries that did not exist. But I didn't write that. I wrote, because we need to verify data integrity before relying on the dashboard for healthcare fulfillment decisions. He called me immediately. His voice was low. That was worse than yelling. Undo the pause, he said. I can't. You can. I won't. A long silence. Then he said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, I said. The system is making it harder than it needs to be. He didn't like that. Grant's confidence worked best when everyone around him treated his opinion like a decision. The second someone separated the two, he got angry. Let's be very clear, he said. I am accountable for Horizon. I looked at the email where he had confirmed the launch. Yes, I said. You are. He hung up. At noon, the COO called an emergency review. Grant joined 10 minutes late, wearing the expression of a man inconvenienced by a problem he believed should have waited until after his presentation. He started talking before anyone asked him a question. Normal launch turbulence, he said. Nothing outside expectations. Then the COO looked at me. What's your assessment? Grant turned toward me. Just slightly. But I saw it. He expected me to protect the launch. He expected me to make his story sound true. I opened my notebook. The platform has an unresolved integration defect affecting delivery status and temperature monitoring records, I said. I identified it in the readiness report last Thursday. The rollout proceeded under Grant's written direction. No emotion. No accusation. Just a sentence with a timestamp behind it. The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No one slammed a hand on the table. But the COO stopped writing. The general counsel looked up. And Grant's jaw tightened for half a second before he caught it. That was the first satisfying turn. Not because he was embarrassed. Because everyone in that room understood something he did not. I had receipts. If you've ever been underestimated at work, you already know where this is going. Subscribe, because the ending is better than you think. The COO asked Grant, "Did you review the readiness report?" Grant leaned back, folded his hands over his stomach. "That's exactly where I was going," he said. Even then, even with the launch already slipping, he tried to turn a direct question into a leadership moment. "Yes," he continued. "And we made a calculated decision to move forward while resolving a limited technical issue." The general counsel asked, "Limited how?" Grant looked at me again. He wanted me to answer. I didn't. Finally, I said, "The issue affects whether the system can verify the status and compliance record of a healthcare shipment." The COO's face changed. "What does that mean operationally?" "It means a delivery can appear complete before we can prove it was delivered under the required conditions." That was when Grant stopped trying to look relaxed. The meeting ended with a 6-hour investigation window. No full shutdown. Not yet. Grant got what he wanted. Just enough time to save the launch. At 2:37 p.m., he came to my desk. No assistant. No audience. No polished voice. "Let's get this fixed," he said. Interesting word. Let's. He had no problem saying "I developed" when the dashboard was green. Now that it was red, suddenly there was a team. I looked up at him. "We need to stop statewide processing until the data is verified." "We don't have time for that. We have more time now than we'll have after a hospital files a complaint." He leaned closer. "You need to understand the visibility of this project." "I do understand it," I said. "That's why I'm being careful." "No," he said. "You're being rigid." There it was again. When Grant didn't have an answer, he gave you a personality flaw. Rigid. Difficult. Not strategic. Too close to the details. Anything except wrong. He told me he had already promised the CEO a successful launch update by 5 p.m. I told him I could give him an accurate update by 5 p.m. He said that isn't the same thing. He was right. It wasn't. At 4:42 p.m., my technical lead found the source of the problem. The platform vendor had used a temporary data field during the pilot. It was never designed for statewide use. Once the system received more than 2,000 shipment updates in an hour, it started pulling prior confirmed records instead of waiting for new verification. That explained the false delivery statuses. But it also uncovered something worse. The vendor had known about the limitation. It was documented in a test note from 3 weeks earlier. A test note Grant had been copied on. A test note he had never opened. Now we had a choice. We could shut down Horizon, admit the launch had failed, and manually reroute everything through the old system. Or we could keep the platform active and hope the defect stayed contained. Grant wanted the second option. Of course he did. He told the technical team to create a workaround. Then he told me to prepare an executive update that framed the issue as a dashboard delay. I said no. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just no. This is not a dashboard delay, I said. This is a verification failure. Grant's face went still. You work for me, he said. I work for Meridian, I said. And Meridian cannot tell hospitals that shipments are compliant when we don't know whether they are. For a second, I thought he might fire me right there. Instead, he smiled. Not his usual confident smile. A smaller one. Colder. Fine, he said. Take the rest of the day. I knew what that meant. He was taking me off the project. At 5:11 p.m., an email went out to the launch group. Grant had appointed himself executive owner and reassigned my operational authority to a director from corporate technology named Ethan. Ethan was smart, but he had never managed a medical delivery lane in his life. He had never stood in a distribution center at 3 a.m. while a refrigeration alert went off. He had never had a hospital compliance officer ask him to prove where a shipment had been for the previous 7 hours. Grant had replaced experience with loyalty. And he was about to learn how expensive that choice could be. I went home at 5:30 p.m. Not because I was defeated. Because my written authority had been revoked, and I was not going to keep doing unpaid accountability work for a man determined to erase my role. But before I left, I sent one final email. To Grant, the COO, legal, compliance, and the head of healthcare operations. It was short. For today's reassignment, I am no longer authorized to approve Horizon launch decisions. For the record, I continue to recommend suspension of statewide healthcare routing until all delivery status and temperature monitoring records are independently validated. Then I attached the original readiness report, the vendor test note, and Grant's 8:26 a.m. confirmation. I sent it at 5:29 p.m. At 5:31 p.m., Grant replied to everyone. Noted. We are moving forward with the appropriate level of urgency. That sentence would come back later. Much later. And by then, urgency would be the last thing he wanted anyone to remember. At 9 a.m. the next morning, I expected Horizon to be struggling. I did not expect the CEO to call me personally. But what happened at 9:12 a.m. is the part nobody saw coming, and it started with a single email Grant never should have sent. Because while he was trying to keep the launch alive, he had made one decision that turned a technical failure into a documented compliance crisis. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed the CEO's office. I answered. Can you come upstairs? The CEO asked. Her voice was controlled. Too controlled. I'm on my way, I said. When I entered the executive conference room, Grant was already there. So were the COO, general counsel, head of compliance, and two people I had never seen before. One had a laptop open. The other had a stack of printed emails. Grant did not look at me. That alone told me the situation had changed. The CEO pointed to an empty chair. Please sit down, she said. Then the general counsel spoke. At 8:47 a.m., a hospital network received an automated Horizon delivery confirmation for a temperature-sensitive surgical shipment. I nodded slowly. The shipment was not delivered, she continued. It was still at our Dayton facility. I knew that was bad. But I also knew it wasn't the whole reason I was in that room. The hospital called our customer escalation line, the COO said. They asked for the verified temperature log. No one spoke. The head of compliance looked down at the table. The log did not exist, she said. Not delayed. Not incomplete. Did not exist. The shipment had been assigned a compliant status by Horizon based on an old record. A record from a different delivery. The hospital had caught it before the supplies were used. That mattered. It prevented the worst possible outcome. But the company had still sent a false compliance confirmation to a healthcare customer. And then Grant made it worse. At 8:58 a.m., before legal had reviewed the issue, he sent an email to the hospital's regional administrator. He copied the CEO. He copied the COO. He copied me. And he wrote, our internal systems confirm the shipment remained within the required temperature range throughout transit. Throughout transit. The shipment had never been in transit. He had made a statement about a verified condition that did not exist. He had sent it in writing. And the general counsel had the email printed in front of her. She slid it across the table. I read it once. Then I placed it back down. Grant finally looked at me. His face had lost all color. Not dramatically. Just enough that he no longer looked like the man who had smiled at me in that Friday meeting. The CEO asked him, what information did you rely on when you sent this? Grant started with the word I, then stopped. He looked at the dashboard screenshot on the laptop. The system showed the shipment as complete, he said. The general counsel asked, and did you verify that status? I believe the team had verified it. Which team? He looked at me. Again. That was when I understood why he had wanted me in the room. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to say that I had been involved. That I had confirmed something. That the failure was a shared decision. But I had learned something important over 6 years at Meridian. When people want you to carry their risk, they usually start by using vague language. The team. The process. The decision. I opened my notebook. I was removed from launch authority at 5:11 p.m. yesterday, I said. At 5:29 p.m., I documented that I did not approve continued statewide healthcare routing. I was not consulted before the message to the hospital was sent. The general counsel nodded once. She had the email. She already knew. But now Grant knew that everyone else knew too. The CEO turned to him. Did you instruct anyone to keep Horizon active after the validation issue was identified? Grant swallowed. I instructed the team to find a workaround. Did you instruct them to keep it active? I said we needed to maintain momentum. The COO leaned forward. That isn't my question. Grant's hands were flat on the table now. No folded fingers. No practiced calm. Yes, he said quietly. I told them to keep it active. The room went silent. The kind of silence that does not need anger because the facts have already done the work. The CEO looked at the general counsel. What is our exposure? The answer came carefully. Potential contract breach. Potential reporting obligations. Potential regulatory review, depending on whether there were additional false confirmations. We need to preserve all communications and suspend the platform immediately. The word immediately hung in the room. That was the shutdown Grant had spent 24 hours avoiding. The COO turned to me. Can you lead the suspension and recovery process? Grant looked up fast. That was the moment. Not the moment he lost his title. Not the moment legal printed his email. The moment he realized the person he had pushed out was the only person who knew how to keep the damage from spreading. I took one breath. Then I said, I can lead it if my authority is restored in writing, and if all launch decisions route through operations, compliance, and legal until the investigation is complete. The CEO nodded. Done. Then I added one more thing. And I need the vendor's complete test documentation. No summaries. No filtered versions. The CEO looked at Grant. Can that be provided? Grant said nothing. The vendor documentation arrived 40 minutes later. It was worse than I expected. There were 9 internal test notes warning that the platform could duplicate historical delivery data under high-volume conditions. 9. The first had been logged 23 days before launch. Grant had been copied on 6 of them. He had opened none. But his assistant had. And in an email from the week before launch, she had asked him whether he wanted a briefing. His response was one line. Not necessary. We need to stay focused on the board narrative. The board narrative. That was what mattered to him. Not the delivery record. Not the hospitals. Not the drivers who had to clean up the route confusion. Not the analysts trying to explain why a system was claiming trucks had arrived in places they had never been. The narrative. By noon, Horizon was shut down statewide. We had 427 healthcare shipments to validate manually. 29 were flagged for possible inaccurate status reporting. 7 required direct outreach to customers. 1 required legal review before anyone could say another word. I led the recovery from a conference room with 3 operations managers, 2 compliance analysts, and a wall covered in handwritten route numbers. It was exhausting, but it was clear. There is a strange relief in a real emergency. No politics. No presentation language. No one pretending a problem is strategic momentum. Just facts. What happened? What is at risk? What has to be fixed? At 2:18 p.m., Grant came into the room. He stood at the door for a second, watching us work. No one looked up. He walked over to me and said, "Can we talk?" I stepped into the hallway. For the first time since I had known him, he didn't sound arrogant. He sounded scared. "I need you to help me frame this for the CEO," he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because of the timing. He still thought this was about framing. I said, "The CEO doesn't need framing. She needs facts." "Come on," he said. "You know how these things work." "Yes," I said. "I do." He lowered his voice. "I gave you visibility on this project." "No," I said. "You took my visibility." "I made a mistake." "You made several." His eyes hardened. "Are you really going to do this now?" I looked at him. "Do what?" "Make this personal." That was the final insult. Not because he said it loudly. Because he believed it. He believed that documenting risks, refusing to approve false information, and protecting customers from a failed system was somehow personal. I kept my voice calm. "Grant, I sent you the risk report Thursday. I asked for confirmation Monday. I documented my removal Tuesday. This is not personal. This is the record." He stared at me. Then he said the one thing I think he expected would make me back down. "You could have stopped this." I nodded. "I tried." He had no answer to that. At 4:05 p.m., the CEO called another executive meeting. This one was shorter. Grant was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His company laptop was collected before he left the building. His access was disabled while he was still in the elevator. 3 weeks later, Meridian announced that Horizon had been suspended indefinitely. The investigation found that the launch had bypassed required operational, compliance, and vendor readiness approvals. It also found that Grant had repeatedly minimized documented warnings in his updates to leadership. He resigned before the final report was issued. The official statement said he was pursuing other opportunities. Of course it did. Corporate language is very good at making exits sound voluntary. But I had seen the calendar invite for his last meeting with the CEO. 20 minutes. No location listed. No attendees listed. Just one subject line. Next steps. The $30 million contract did not disappear. The hospital network delayed its decision by 60 days. That hurt. But because we moved quickly, owned the failure honestly, and rebuilt the rollout with actual operational controls, we stayed in consideration. 6 months later, Meridian won the contract. Not because Horizon was perfect. It wasn't. We rebuilt it from the ground up. New data validation. Independent compliance checks. No launch without field approval. No executive override without legal documentation. And one more change. My name was listed as program director on every board update. Not because I needed applause. Because accountability should have a name attached to it. Especially when the work is hard. Especially when someone else wants the credit before they understand the responsibility. If that hit you the way it hit me, hit subscribe. This channel is proof that being underestimated is a warning, not a weakness. Here's what I learned. At work, people will sometimes try to take your idea, your project, your labor, or your results. You cannot always stop them from talking, but you can make sure they cannot rewrite the record. Know your rights. Know your role. Know what authority you have, what authority you do not have, and what decisions require your written approval. Then document the important things. Not every disagreement. Not every annoying comment. The important things. The risk you identified. The direction you were given. The approval you did not provide. The date. The time. The exact language. A clean email can protect you more than a perfect speech ever will. You do not need to be loud to be untouchable. You need to be clear. When someone says, "Let's move forward," ask who approved it. When they say, "We'll handle it later," ask what it means. When they try to make you responsible without giving you authority, put the boundary in writing. That is not being difficult. That is being professional. Grant thought confidence made him powerful. But confidence without facts is just a countdown. And when the countdown ends, the person with the documentation is the person who gets believed. And the next story was even more personal. I handled one client for nearly 4 years. One client. They were 60% of the company's revenue, and my boss treated me like I was replaceable right up until the day that client called me directly with one question that changed everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when they realized the person they pushed out was the only reason their biggest account had stayed.